Good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, whatever day it is in July, and we're talking to you from the beautiful studios at WJOB in Hammond, Indiana. And this is the Wieser Podcast. Try to bring this to you weekly when we can, and we've been pretty successful in kind of keeping sticking to the schedule. Going to do something slightly different today. Not different so much in the format, but different in the approach to an issue that I think resonates from everybody, not just folks around here, but all of you that are listening in the hinterlands out there and don't know everything about the region or the Midwest that the rest of us do. But I thought this was really incredibly relevant and timely that we're going to talk about this morning, and I'm honored, truly honored, to have as my guest the current clerk treasurer of the town of Maryville, Indiana, town manager. I'm sorry, former clerk treasurer of Highland for many years, current town manager of the town of Maryville, one of the largest in the state.
The largest town.
There we go. It's the largest town in the state of Indiana. Obviously a significant position. Not only that, but those of you who do live around here and who do travel our interstate highway system, particularly I-65, will recognize the incredible booming economy and economic development in your community. And Michael plays a key role in that, together with the town council that have done a remarkable job of developing the I-65 corridor to, I'm confident, to your taxpayers' benefits and to other folks as well. But let me just lay a real quick groundwork for you here. Despite the fact that I am substantially older than Michael, and look it, unfortunately, he and I have known each other. I met Michael when I believe he was a senior in high school, as I recall.
That's correct.
At Highland High, when I had the good fortune, and I was a young town councilman in Highland, and was asked by the government teacher and baseball coach, Dan Miller, he said, "Hey, we don't ever teach. I don't get to teach local government. I teach state government, I teach national government. We talk about all of the issues, obviously, but we really don't talk much at all about local government. Would you be willing to come in?" Because Dan and I were good friends, played softball together. So I said, "Okay, yeah, I'd love to." So I went in and spoke to a class, and when it was finished, he and I wanted to do kind of an analysis. And he said, "Well, what did you think?" And I said, I can't. I said, I was impressed. They were engaged, which I didn't think. I thought they'd all be thinking about what they're going to do during the summer, where they're going to go to college, all that kind of stuff. And but they were very engaged, asked very good questions. And I said, "But I do have a question." And he said, "What?" I said, "Who's that?" And I'll clean it up. I said, "Who's that guy? Who's that kid in the back that knew more than I did?"
Oh, hardly.
He said, "That would be Michael Griffin." That's how Mike and I initially met, and it's been a beautiful relationship
Not only
ever
beautiful,
since.
You earlier started the honor. The honor is all mine, Jim Wieser. And I am so grateful that you gave me that encouragement back then. And look what it's led me to.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad because it benefits, and it's to the benefit of us that you decided to go in that direction. You had a lot of options when you were younger because of your brilliance and your stature in the community, your wonderful parents,
Wonderful parents.
wonderful people, and. But I digress a little bit, but I wanted to give you kind of a history of where Michael and I come from. What I really wanted to talk about today is the confluence, for lack of a better term, of two incidents that occurred directly involving the town of Maryville. I've lived here most of my life, almost all of my life, born and raised here, born and raised in this city, Hammond, then moved to Highland and now live in Schererville. I've always been involved in the community and lived here. And I've seen some, we've experienced natural disasters, mostly flooding because of the layout of the topography of northwest Indiana, being on the borders of Lake Michigan and having the Little Calumet River and a number of water arteries that run through the community. So a lot of flooding. Floods in the community in Highland that I experienced as a town councilman, the terrible flooding in the Munster area in 2008, I believe, and a lot. But I can honestly say, in my many years here, I never really saw a tornado. I never, and maybe I'm just pie in the sky kind of guy, but I never did. And when I, several days afterwards, drove down 61st Avenue in Maryville, because it impacted all of us. Certainly impacted me. Mike and I were talking. The Catholic High School, which has been there since 1959 in Maryville, Andrean High School, was just devastated. And that's a school that my son graduated from, a number of Maryville officials graduated from. But not just that, just to drive down 61st and see the devastation of those houses all along 61st and the businesses, and then shooting off, was shocking to me. Was that June 11th? Is that when that was, Michael?
June 11th is when it occurred. We declared the emergency June 12th.
Okay. So June 11th, that happens. And I want Michael to talk about that for a minute, so people kind of get a sense of someone who's on the ground, someone who's there, not to exaggerate, 24/7, but as town manager, he's there. He's dealing with this daily for weeks. And then sort of compare and contrast that to an incident that occurred and a letter that the town received shortly thereafter from the Attorney General of the state of Indiana, Todd Rokita. And just to give you an idea of, one, what public officials have to deal with when you leave your office or you leave work at 5 o'clock or whenever, and you decide, okay, what am I going to do the next day? Oh yeah, I'm going to have to recover from a tornado that we've never ever experienced around here, and I have to deal with this is an editorial opinion, a nonsensical, absolutely insensitive letter from the Attorney General of the state of Indiana. So what I'd like to do, Mike, is turn it over to you right now just to talk about and just to let people understand what it was like starting on June 11th in the town of Maryville.
We had actually, interestingly enough, had decided to cancel a public information event regarding data centers, just to better inform us about it, but more importantly also inform the public that we're serving. And we thought the weather looked bad. We had no idea at that time how prescient the weather forecast was. We now know that we experienced what weather people call an EF2 tornado. That's winds that can go from 120 to 135 miles per hour. There was some weather effect throughout the town. We're 34 square miles. That is about 6 times Highland size for a frame of reference. But there was a particular area, roughly running from about 61st Avenue north to about 57th, almost to 53rd, but about 57th, and then in the neighborhoods. And I, too, was taken aback at how 61st Avenue looked. We actually had our disaster headquarters deployed there. The town council president, pursuant to the statute, issued the executive order to create an emergency. Now, I am no hero in this. I am grateful to be serving the people of Maryville indirectly by serving directly their town council. And those people were first and foremost. They have selected a team of department heads that are remarkable. we have a written disaster plan in the town of Maryville, and except for some modifications the chief thought he should make, I recognized it when I read it because I'm a nerd and I read that kind of stuff. It looked very much like Highlands. He and the former fire chief of the town of Highland were close, and he's a professional at this. Under the terms of that disaster plan, the person in charge is the fire chief. And the fire chief knew how to work his plan excellently. Whether he had a written checklist or he had it in his head, I think it was a little bit of both. He did a remarkable job of mobilizing people and getting things addressed. The first thing to get addressed was, in concert with the great police chief we have and the great police force we have, firefighters and police immediately went and deployed to all the residences that were like apartments that were affected to make sure residents were out. They also went to the residences. Part of the challenge was we had so much debris, which they call, I beg your pardon, so much debris that we, I will silence that, I beg your pardon. I thought I had.
That's quite all right.
So much debris that it was difficult to actually get through streets. I hadn't seen anything like that ever. So largely the first job was to clear the streets so that we could access to get into several apartments that had to be scoured and several residences. If you think 61st Avenue was heartrending, you should go into the neighborhoods. Some of them look like what I would imagine you'd describe as a dollhouse, where you have 2 stories, the top story has just 3 walls, no roof, no 4th wall, and debris everywhere. And I'm trying to imagine the families emerging after that emergency from their basements, presumably, and then reckoning with having no place to live suddenly. I'm just somebody that helped them know what the rules were. I asked the chief what I could do, the fire chief, Chief Edward Yerga, and I did everything I could in terms of the paperwork that's necessary. For example, during an emergency, we're allowed to suspend the bid rules. So we needed to get contractors because we only had so much organizational capacity in our street department. We had Dyer Construction. We had Joe's Contractor. We had, I don't want to mention Clemens. They all had significant trucks with Katrina experience that went in there and did this amazing job. We had to get a big grinder that could grind this stuff at a rapid rate. You should see the mulch now we're covered with. We're trying to distribute now. And then we had to get the people relocated. The American Red Cross, the Salvation Army were there immediately. We had people from the SBA. The Indiana Department of Homeland Security immediately briefed us on the 3rd day after, telling us what had to happen next. And then the Lake County Department of Homeland Security. Jim Wieser, those people are amazing. They were professional throughout. They mobilized volunteers. We had a significant group of volunteers from Andrean. And that was significant because it was students and they had such significant damage. No roof. I don't know how they're going to be in there. But I'm told reliably from our planning department that they've already applied for 5 permits. They intend to try to be ready for school in August. I'm sure they're relying on a higher power that we don't offer them too. But
I'm sure they are.
It's remarkable. I'm not, having been a member of the congressman's staff when Highland had that great flood in a subdivision in North Wicker Park Estates, or as we used to like to call it colloquially, Frog Hollow. That was devastating enough. And I talk to people who live there still and talk about how when it rains, they're always nervous that they're going to lose their home. I can't imagine what it's like to live through this. You'll hear them describing what I've heard described before. It sounds like a railroad train coming. We had difficulty. First, the town of Highland was very gracious to Maryville. They allowed us to temporarily shelter people through the American Red Cross at the Lincoln Community Center. May the town of Highland be ever blessed for that kindness to us. We were able then to get them into Pierce, because one of the things you want to do is to try to have them in the community, because they all have jobs. They're going to try to have their lives get as normal as possible. We started with a shelter of roughly about 23 to 44. That number is going down. We're going to be able to use sheltering now, we were told, by the Indiana Department of Housing and Community Development. It's authority of the state. They're going to be able to put these people into a Maryville-based hotel for up to 30 days. And our hope is that will at least get people to have alternative housing after that. But it'll still be the issue of rebuilding. So we had the council actually approve an additional series of 7-day extensions through July 22nd. And we'll reevaluate if we need to extend it after that. but I have to be frank. Let me give you some of the statistics. We have to
that's
do an
what I'd
impact
be
statement.
interested in.
The impact statement is basically something we have to prepare that the Lake County, Paul Petrie and his staff, I'm sorry, he's the deputy director. I should really know the director. But they were there every day. They did a great job mobilizing volunteers who went in. They have volunteers who are trained to go into backyards. The Rubicon group, they're called. They come in and they're trained. They go on property with permission. They got everything to the curb where we could start collecting it. But as of the end of June, our assessment was 489 damaged housing units. 205 were destroyed. 61 were classified as major damage, so they could be restored with a lot of work. 104 were classified as minor damage, and 119 is simply affected. So that might mean some shingles are off, some siding is off, maybe the limbs fell on the house. What was really amazing to me is this week, federal officials will be in on Thursday, we believe, to start the federal assessment. So our emergency declaration allowed a trigger with the county. It allowed us to send this information to the governor's office. We had certain thresholds. They had to be satisfied that we hit around 13.7 million, I think was the number. We were well over that in just Maryville alone. And remember,
Of total damage.
that's correct. 69 counties had this some experience with a weather-related damage, and we had several communities. And then a week later, Griffith got hit.
Right, that's true, yeah.
So nearby communities of Dyer, Gary, Hobart, Highland all immediately called me that morning. I got awoken at 6:30 by the chief of staff of the Gary mayor offering to help. We've had, and having to manage all of that in the midst of trying to manage the crisis as well. So largely my job was to do anything that the fire chief asked, to stay out of his way, to make sure we followed the paperwork, to gather the paperwork, because the next big step is going to be to allow, hopefully, the federal reimbursement. So for every dollar we spend, we potentially, if we qualify and the federal government, the president declares the emergency we need, we'll be eligible, unless things change, for 75 cents on the dollar. So the way I like to think of it is, for every million we spent, we have to pay $250,000.
Got it. That's on the one hand, I want to say that's fascinating. It's fascinating, but yet it's just terribly concerning that so many people had to and continue to suffer as a result of this natural event that took place. So just in the process and the steps, you talked about going to the county and how generous and how responsive the county was and Homeland Security Department. Then it goes to, I assume it goes to the governor, and the governor has to make some sort of a disaster declaration.
That is correct. His declaration freed up some money. So residents who've been affected by this, if you are underinsured or uninsured, heaven forfend, you're eligible now for disaster relief grants of up to $25,000. You can go to the Maryville website, and we have a link to that. We actually have a page just dedicated to disaster recovery services that are available. People can still call upon the Red Cross, and they can call upon the Salvation Army. They've been remarkable. I want to give you some additional statistics about this. We collected, as of the date of my impact statement, 380.21 tons of debris, and that's an understatement. And we had, by the time I got this ready, we had just started the process of getting rid of what they call vegetation, construction debris, and other stuff. There was 30,000 cubic yards that we had already gathered. By the end of this, it's going to be major amounts, most of which was tree falling, debris, and that sort of thing. A lot of roofs will have to be replaced. So we need FEMA in. We know that the governor's made his declaration, which made all of that available, but he's waiting, I believe, for all 69 counties to give him the impact statements that we filed already. One gets filed with FEMA in Region 5 in Chicago, and the other gets filed with the Department of Homeland Security of Indiana. And then he's got to make the formal request. Something must have happened because FEMA's already expected to be here on Thursday. The most crucial thing will be the application for the reimbursements, which will make some money available also, we hope, for some reconstruction I expect that we're going to get briefed on that as well. We just haven't been. I have a little experience of this, having been a staff member for the congressman when Highland had its episode. And I get the process. They'll set up a disaster field office. We'll have people directly to talk to. We'll get a briefing about what's available. I know the congressman's office has been calling us, letting us know they'll do every bit of advocacy that they can for us. In fact, what's been most heartening for me is the number of people being neighborly. I even joked. NIPSCO had 2 episodes of power outages, the biggest one being at the tornado, obviously. They worked round the clock to get us information about how quickly to get the power back. So we have a little basement damage from some pumps that didn't have power. But I noticed where the intersection of Broadway and 61st, there wasn't traffic lights. People were remarkably courteous to each other. They'd like, remember the rules of the road. I don't know if that was a Maryville phenomenon or what, but you could just see how neighborly everyone was. People were trying to help one another. That part was heartening. I feel like that's essentially what makes communities strong, is how neighborly they are in times like this. The strength of Maryville was really evidenced in that, and our hope is the public servants who are there to serve them, the elected leadership's heart's in the right place. They're doing everything they can to help us get those resources. But to be frank, or candid, the state of Indiana is doing profound public finance restructuring. I'm trying to put it in its best light. I have other words for it when I'm not talking publicly. It has already affected our collection rate. We're down by $820,000. That is significant for us. We use our property tax largely to do public safety, a little bit for redevelopment, and then a little bit of backing debt, which makes our debt more cheap. We're expecting 935 next year, and by the third year, we're supposed to lose 1.3 million, which we can never make up. They're talking in the current law that we'll have a replacement source called a local income tax, which means the income taxes people see now will go away, and there'll be a new version. They haven't worked out quite how they're going to fund the RDA yet.
Right.
And we'll have something local. Now, Dr. DeBoer, who's really smart about this stuff, retired professor emeritus at Purdue, says that most communities will not get enough to make up what they're losing. Maryville will be one of those few communities that might be okay with it, but you're replacing us with a variable revenue source from one that's stable. And I can tell you all the worst things about property tax. I taught graduate students about it, and I understand why people don't like it, but it is reliable when you pay for public safety, which you don't want to have a downturn effect, and for teachers, although we don't do property tax as much to pay teachers anymore in Indiana. Having said that, so if we are not able to get the reimbursement from FEMA, we will be significantly impaired. And I'm glad that there's people of prayer out there. I covet their prayers to help Maryville through. I'm going to do my very best, both transcendent and in present time, temporal time, to do what we can to be smart about that. We know what our primary mission is, but right now we're able to deliver full government services. We're trying to do everything we can to augment our organizational capacity, and I can't praise enough our fire chief, our police chief, all the department heads. The Maryville Conservancy District lent us a guy, Todd Sanders. He's been remarkable to help us mobilize both volunteers and organize the attack literally on getting the debris from the streets. It's much better than it was. We hope it'll continue to get better, but we're evaluating it on a daily basis.
Yeah, Mike, you bring up so many good points, and the one I want to emphasize is, and I saw it in my public service, especially in the town of Highland. While I was there, we had one, like you said, really significant event down in Wicker Park Estates, which happened to be part of my district, and one incredible snow event. We won't even get into those, but one incredible snow event. The thing you notice, and it goes to the character of our communities, but it goes to the character of our I truly believe our form of government and our democracy is that when there's trouble and when there's disaster, anybody and everybody that can lend a hand does. They're there, whatever it is that they think that they could do, or however you can assess it, and then use them to benefit the cleanup and benefit the work that needs to be done to restore the community to a sense of comfort again is great. But you also bring up the other point that we know we can rely on our citizens. We know that when push comes to shove, they're going to be there. It's never, in my experience as an elected official and as an observer, it's never failed. What sometimes fails is the public response, is the response and I don't mean the direct response. What Maryville has done, anybody who, I live in Cherryville adjacent to Maryville, and I go through Maryville often, and all you have to do is have gone through there a day or two after the tornado and go through there now and say, how did they get all of this done? How did they get it done with what I know as a former elected official are the limited resources available to you, especially in the state of Indiana? And then Michael talked about what we're currently experiencing. That when I say we, I mean all of us in the state of Indiana, but particularly local governmental entities that really were negatively impacted by whatever it was, SCA 1 or SB 1 or whatever bill that we want to refer to, that where there was this great transference of resources. And I'm not going to get into all that. That's a subject for another day. And it's been a subject for about a year and a half of a lot of discussion. But the bottom line is it negatively impacted local communities just operating as they normally do.
That's correct.
Not communities that have to face the crisis that you had to face, or the 68 other counties in the state of Indiana that have to face that. And they've already been negatively impacted. At the national level, we all know, at least it's been widely known, that that FEMA's been reduced. It's about as nice as I can say. That the funding for FEMA's been and the staffing of FEMA at the national level has been has drastically been reduced. All of these emergency responses, so that we can ramp up ICE and whomever else the president decides is necessary for him to enforce his autocratic behavior. So we have to face. We're facing all that, folks, and Michael's bringing that to you in real time. You're getting a sense of what they're struggling with. He's being very kind, and I appreciate that. But they're struggling not only with how do we make sure displaced people are returned? How do we make sure that homes are repaired? How do we make sure that businesses are assisted? How do we make sure that the Red Cross and Salvation Army are able to get necessary basic human needs to these people? And then sit back and say, oh, and by the way, we're really hamstrung financially in an unrelated matter. So that brings me to a second point I want to raise with all of you. During all of this human suffering that you're experiencing and responding to, and your community's responding to, you all receive a letter from our Attorney General, Todd Rokita, who, by the way, is a northern Indiana, North Indiana, Northwest Indiana
Munster High guy
person, born and raised, as you said, Munster High guy, and he and I have known each other a long time. We've crossed paths more often than I care to think about, almost always on the opposite side of issues. And he sends a letter, and I can't remember what was either the date of the letter or the receipt of the letter? Do you remember, Mike?
Was it July 7th?
No, I think it was earlier than that. It was
Yeah,
the
it was
letter was
earlier.
dated, I know, in June.
We've got to act by July 15th, which is tomorrow,
Okay.
as this podcast is being recorded. The letter basically reminded us of a statute we were aware of. The General Assembly and the governor favored this, said that we cannot do anything to interfere with the enforcement of federal immigration law. We understand that. Maryville's not had a designation as a sanctuary community. However, we had to respond in January to a phone call where we learned through the Washington Post, which we learned from a resident, none of us are subscribers, that Maryville was mentioned as a possible site for the next phase that ICE was going to undertake to erect or lease detention centers as part of the immigration enforcement initiative of the White House. And we were stunned. I immediately get a call. I'm tasked with trying to run down what happened. I'm telling you what I learned in real time. And we had a lot of calls. Some of the residents called their elected representatives directly. Some called our office, but I think most of the response was that way. We felt we had to make an opinion on the subject because, after all, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, and I like to remind people, Article 1, Section 9 even has cooler language about the freedom to express ourselves in the Indiana Constitution. The council decided to pass a resolution, they had some consultation on development, that merely expressed our opinion, that is the council's opinion on behalf of the community, about the wisdom of that policy. It was just that. We even decided to use a resolution instead of an ordinance, because resolutions as an instrument, if I'm nerdy enough to have studied about that sort of thing.
As am I.
There you go. Well, you're a lawyer. I'm just a nerd in graduate school. I want to do a paper on them. They basically are not long durant. They're very perfect for small, short time administrative or ministerial actions and for the sense of the council to be expressed. That's all we were doing.
Exactly. And they don't have the same significance and the same impact that the passage of an ordinance or a law
That's correct. That's different. The letter basically told the town of Maryville it first must repeal that resolution passed in January. We got it in June and it passed in January. We're a little surprised by that. Secondly, it said that we have to pledge that we have to assure people that we're going to do nothing to try to talk them out of cooperating with ICE if they're getting an offer on their warehouse, and so on. And then we have to issue a public statement apologizing for breaking that law. I think I've got that right.
I'm sorry to hear that you got it right, but
Yeah,
I think you probably did.
I did read the letter twice. I went immediately to the town attorney. We conferred on it, and our first view was to simply respond with a press release to explain our position. That press release with a cover letter was sent to the Attorney General's office as well. And tonight, the agenda still hosts a resolution that would consider repealing that resolution. And part of what informs that now, I don't know if it will pass. The council still has to have a conversation. We wanted to get it on the agenda at least, so if we want to, because tomorrow's our deadline. There's a lot of things to consider. At the time it was passed, it was the belief of the council they were doing nothing that was inconsistent with Title V where that statute resides. We were simply expressing our opinion, which ought to be still protected, regardless of what that said. Even if some of the council later on spoke in other forums about how they would try to enforce local zoning, which we didn't think we had any change in the law on, but we may learn otherwise. That's true. Because we could be right, but it'll be costly to vindicate that through litigation, given that we're already depleted because we're getting less property tax collection because of the restructuring policy that's being implemented over 3 years by the legislature, and we just had this significant weather event that is requiring us to go deep into our pockets to try to find places to find the money to be able to do the corrective measures that we're required to do, which is the whole point of us existing, really. These are the times that we demonstrate the whole point of self-government. We're considering whether we have the resources to have that fight at this time. And I think the council will have that conversation among themselves. It'll probably be discussed tonight. And I can't tell you as I sit here, as I shouldn't be able to anyway. I can tell you what's on the agenda. I cannot tell you how the council will respond to it, but I will serve their lawful interests with zeal.
There is so much compacted in your response. And to parse it all out would take us, you wouldn't make the council meeting. It would be that long to do. But let's just get down to some very basic governing thoughts and concerns. The Attorney General of the state of Indiana, who is from here, who was born and raised here in Northwest Indiana, his letter was as insensitive, untimely, and absurd as any state document I have ever seen. This is a guy, and this is just the bullying instinct, unfortunately, of his whole political career, and the career that he ties in with in his chosen political party, to ignore the fact. It probably was absolutely oblivious to it, if I know how he governs, probably oblivious to the fact that almost adjoining community, but an adjacent community to the community he was born and raised in was just devastated by an EF2 tornado. In my experience, and Michael, if you've gotten information to the contrary, correct me if I'm wrong, the worst tornado experience we've ever had here, or at least in my lifetime. And, that goes back to the horse and buggy. So that's a time. That's a long period of time. To then send out this inane letter that says, hey, you guys have been interfering with ICE, which, as you rightly pointed out, is really back to events that took place at the first of the year. You get the letter during the crisis.
Yeah.
During the response to the crisis. While they're mobilized, while this community, Maryville, and all the other communities, as Michael pointed out, that have volunteered time and personnel and resources. And his concern is, what you guys said, geez, that wasn't really nice to ICE. Well, I kind of like that. That's very alliterative. That it wasn't. You are interfering with their ability to enforce their outrageous, unfair immigration policy. And I want to point one thing. This is very interesting. At the end of January, I think it was the end of January, could be beginning of February, I received a phone call. One of the most unusual calls I've received in public service or quasi-public service that said, and I won't tell you where it came from, it's confidential, but we are aware that ICE is looking in the town of Maryville, this is said to me, for a location or locations for detention center or centers. We are asking you if you would be willing to help head up the legal response to that.
Interesting.
It's very interesting. I was blown away. First, I knew nothing about it, obviously. Second, I was kind of honored to be asked by these individuals to say, help lead this response. And I was more than willing to do it. I was, come on, folks. You can't keep turning a blind eye to what's going on with ICE. You can't keep doing it. People can't keep getting killed in the streets of America because they think they look like somebody, or they don't look like you and me, or they don't look like Michael. And we can't have that. We can't. that cannot be a governmental policy to have this rogue. I won't. All the comparisons have been done with other autocratic governments throughout history, and I won't even get into that. But this rogue form of government, these people, untrained or poorly trained, I don't want to say it, poorly trained, who are tearing at the fabric of our community. And here's our Attorney General saying, okay, yeah, okay, big deal. Big deal. You guys had a little damage in your community. Big frickin' deal. You know, should I be sensitive to it? Maybe as a public official, state official, but I don't have time for that. ICE is calling. ICE is calling. The president is calling. This is what we have to do. Should maybe you be a little more sensitive to it because it's where you grew up and you know the people and you understand the people. They've been your constituents ever since you got into public service. And this is how you treat them? By sending a threatening, probably unconstitutionally designed letter to say, hey, don't interfere. We hear stories. We hear rumors. We're told that you might be interfering. By the way, simply by exercising, as you so rightfully pointed out, your right of freedom of expression and your right of free speech in a resolution that has no compelling
it doesn't have the force of law.
It doesn't have the force of law. That's a great way to put it. Doesn't have a force of law. It was an expression and the opinion of the council, which is appropriate, which is done, and when it is done, rightfully, if it's done correctly and rightfully by public officials expressing it, it's done by a resolution. Everything the town of Maryville did, everything that their people did, was correct in response to that. In response to what they were hearing in the community and the information they were receiving. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't accusatory. It was, this is the expression of our opinion. This is what we think. This is us expressing our opinion. Oh, and by the way, we're forced to do this, or not forced, but we do this as our civic duty and our public responsibility as public servants. We're serving our community. This is what we hear. We're serving our community. And the ultimate reaction, months later, during the worst crisis, natural disaster crisis I'm sure the community has ever experienced, they get this threat. You don't get this done by July, like you said, by July 15th, and you'll be the first detainees in the detention center for whatever reason. That maybe is my editorial opinion. It is beyond the pale. It is beyond the pale that could even take place. And it's beyond the pale, in my opinion, that the Maryville Town Council, the legislative body, their advisors, Michael, the staff, Joe Svetnoff, their attorney, all the people that have to get involved in this, have got to turn their attention away from taking care of their citizens, which is their first and foremost obligation as public servants, and they do it. I know each and every member of that town council, and I know the people in Maryville. I had the great honor of serving them for 8 years as the chairman of the Democratic Party in this county, and I know them to be people dedicated to their community. And instead of being out there, instead of getting things organized, instead of getting the funding necessary, instead of making sure the appropriate documents are filed, they've got to deal with this. It's absolutely ludicrous. Folks, and then I'll let Michael take over. Folks, you got to wake up. You have to wake up and smell the coffee in the state of Indiana and with our national administration to understand that they don't care. There's no empathy in those governmental officials. None whatsoever. None. If there was any demonstration in the part of our Attorney General, this is it. This is the height of lack of empathy, lack of care, lack of concern. Instead of sending a letter and saying, hey, what can I do? What can we do? What can our office do to help assist you in the paperwork, in the processing, in the funding? What can we do? No, not at all. What will you do to assist an organization that, again, yesterday in the state of Maine, gunned down another innocent person in the streets of this country? We can't have this anymore. We can't have this anymore. All I can say is I wish the officials in the town of Maryville, I'm sure there's 7 council persons just anguishing over how to handle this in the midst of this crisis, how to handle this response, and then I'll shoot it your way.
Anguish is actually a very apt description, Jim, about these elected servant leaders that are there. They picked these great department heads. When we first got this, who were there before I arrived. So I inherited that. That was a blessing. It's especially evident in the times that we're currently trying to respond to adequately. My job when I first got that was to confer with the town attorney and not bother it with the people who were out doing the first response stuff. That wasn't their issue. So we did all the conferences, made the determination to respond as we did, and tonight the council's going to have to make that decision. In my mind, and I've seen it now in my many years of public service, particularly at the municipal level, in the end, what local government is that, and this is especially true about the elected leaders that are serving the people of Maryville in the 7 districts that they come from, who get together and still do things for the good of the whole. They're just people who step up and ask their friends and neighbors and say, look, if you don't mind, I'm very willing to serve you this way. If enough of you decide I should, I'm willing to do it. But it's still essentially servant leaders being available to their friends and neighbors and all the people of Maryville to do their very best, with their very best judgment, within the confines of the law, within the resources that seem to be getting more and more difficult to maintain, to do good works. They're giving their best judgment every day, I believe. I'm proud to be serving there, Indiana's largest town, 3rd largest municipality in Lake County, 25th largest out of 567 in the state of Indiana. I never miss an opportunity to say that. And I'm hopeful for Maryville. We are concerned about once we get the primary and secondary relief efforts out, assuming FEMA will come through, we're going to have to evaluate some neighborhoods where the houses may be so destroyed, the families may decide they don't have the resources enough to make the remedies they want. I hope that doesn't happen very much at all. I hope there'll be enough there so everybody can come back and make Maryville their home again. But there'll be a lot more work beyond July 22nd when our current emergency declaration will expire if they decide to extend it. We still know we have a lot of work to do that'll be ahead. It'll be different kinds of phases, but I know the people of Maryville are foremost in the minds of all 7 of our elected leaders. They're foremost in my mind, and as well as the department heads, and we're going to do our very best every day to do that, and then continue the work of governing every day. I had a friend of mine that once coined a phrase, life is so daily. It's never been more true than my experience in Maryville.
That is just so true and so well stated, Mike. And admittedly, I thought about today's program, and I just couldn't get over the fact that the reaction to a devastating crisis and emergency in the community was responded to so well by so many people, by so many public officials, by staff people, by the police, by the fire department, by other communities, and we can go on and on. And I admired that, and it's been in the back of my mind. I've watched it. And then this other issue pops up that just from a political perspective, and I'll admit it, you all know my background and you all know my pedigree, and I'm proud of it, and I don't hide from it. To think that in the midst of this crisis, this self-serving sycophant in the Attorney General's office has to send out this threatening, cruel, in my opinion, politically cruel, governmentally cruel letter to Maryville in the midst. It would be bad enough. It would be bad enough if there hadn't been a crisis and you got that letter. That would have been bad enough. But in the midst of all this, for these folks to have to try to turn their attention away from what is real. What did you say? You said it's daily?
Daily, yes.
Is daily. To turn their attention away from that and in directly serving their constituents in the direst of circumstances. That's even a word. And I don't know. and turn your attentions from that obligation to respond to the silliness, the absolute silliness of the actions of our Attorney General. So, I mean, folks, in wrapping this up, all I can remind you is of several things. One, we are so fortunate. And when I say we, I mean collectively. I don't just mean the town of Maryville, but we are so fortunate in Northwest Indiana to have the type of elected officials that we do, that for the most part, it's been my experience, set aside politics, and when it's time to dig in and to get the job done, whatever the issue might be, politics is aside. You do what you have to do for your constituents. You do what you have to do for the people. That's one thing. That's one lesson that we take out of this. The second lesson that I take out of it is, folks, we're 3.5 months, I don't know, away from a midterm election that is going to impact the governance of our state and our local area and our by congressional districts, by statewide officers that are running, by senators that are running. And folks, the absolute best way to change the way things are, and I hope we all agree they have to be changed, is to get out and exercise your right to vote, which is a whole other issue that we will be talking about, and we have talked about in the past on this show, but we will be talking about in earnest coming up, because I see the president's announced he's having an address to the nation on Thursday, and I'm sure it's an address to set forth his illegal, unconstitutional attack on the electoral system. And we need to be prepared for that, because the answer is to get out. The answer is to get out and vote. And if you do, and then next year we have local elections, and we'll get to that at some point. But if you do that, then you can wake up in the morning to go about your daily routine and know that you've got great elected officials who care about you in the town of Maryville, in the town of Highland, in Cherryville, in Gary, in Hammond, all across here, that they have incredible leadership in their community, in their staff, town managers like Michael, town engineers like Steve King, town planners like Sheila Shine, and the chief and the fire chief, knowing that to the extent you can, you will be safe and secure in your homes, absent natural disasters, because they care, because they act as public servants. I know I'm grateful for the local officials that we have here. I'm grateful for the administrative officials we have, Michael. I'm particularly grateful for you being willing to come here today. It's always a genuine pleasure to sit with you, as we often do. I thank everybody for listening and for watching. And please, take what you've heard today to heart. I mean, this is what it's all about, folks. This is, when push comes to shove, this is what it's all about. I thank, as always, our great director, Adriana Alvarez, for all the fine work that she does, for putting this together, for letting an old guy come on and ramble incessantly. And he's extremely grateful. And until next time, thank you. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Have a great day.